Hey there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. So our lame duck president is pushing ahead with some portions of what I referred to on this channel as one of the largest land grabs in modern history. I'm not forgetting about some of the land grabs that have happened in the past. Yes, the Homestead Act was a very big land grab. But what I am referring to is, in recent years, one of the largest land grabs. And this has to do with the National Electricity Corridor, and there's been some improvements to this. I wanted to talk about this for a little bit today, bring you guys up to speed on what it looked like before and what it looks like now after the elections. But before I get into that, a couple things. I want to give an update on our farm fund. We've been taking applicants, we've been working on some projects, and our team asked me to kind of put this out there and see if any of you guys had any suggestions for this. Number one, we just spent a lot of our time working out logistics on hay delivery. This is a challenge. It's an embarrassing challenge because we should know where to get hay in our own state. We've been doing this for years, but the problem is that a lot of these farms that are up there, they lost a lot of pasture land. And so for the last several months, there's been a lot more hay going into the mountains than what we're normally used to seeing because of the destruction of the farmland. So basically, I've been trying to buy hay with funds and get it out to the mountains. We've been able, where we are in our area, to actually get some hay donated. Although I think, donations are one of those things that are starting to run a bit thin. People are getting to the point where they just can't simply donate anymore. But we have been able to get some hay donated and then hire trucks to get it up to the mountains. But for the cost of that, I was trying to find hay that's out there that we could buy and help stimulate the local economy, but I can't seem to find anybody selling hay. So, well, we did find some people that were selling donated hay, but just don't get me going on that because I have some words for those people. Point is, that's one of the things we're looking for are people who can do hay deliveries to Western North Carolina. We're willing to pay for it. We're just trying to work out logistics, make it a little easier. I mean, right now we have people driving a couple hundred miles. It's a difficult situation. Chicken tractors. We've got requests for chicken tractors. If anybody knows anybody who's a dealer of some decent chicken tractors who can help us get them at dealer cost, that would be helpful to the fund. Rabbit hutches, same thing. Again, we're looking for sources where we could at least get them at dealer cost. We're not profiting. We're not trying to get somebody to donate something and cost money out of their pocket, but we are trying to reduce costs. Fencing, particularly goat fence, some field fence, T-posts, looking for sourcing on that. Again, not free, but discounted. Okay, heavy equipment, we can't justify this expense, but we get a lot of cleanup requests. We have been utilizing equipment over the past several months. Those resources are drying out. All of our tractors are just farm tractors, Fords, old Fords, things like that. What we really need is something that's got a front end loader, a backhoe, and has enough power that we could put a sizable wood chipper on it. If anybody out there, this is a wild card, I know, but if anybody out there knows anybody who has a tractor in decent working condition that has, a good set of implements on it like that, we do have a need for it, preferably four-wheel drive based on the terrain that we're going into. And that's, it's not something we can get with the funds that we have available. Those have to go to the farms, but it is something that I think our nonprofit could put to some heavy use and help extend our resources. So if you know a dealer who could use a little bit of marketing, I'm very good at that. I also just want to say, one of the farms we've been helping out is a ranch in Clyde, North Carolina. They've had some of their fields washed out. They've also traditionally depended heavily on agritourism. And I think a lot of people in these areas, a lot of these farms have always depended on agritourism. And, there are road closures that are on Google. This was one of our logistics issues with hay. There are road closures on Google that just aren't true. They're not factual. And because of that, this particular ranch has lost a lot of bookings that actually help feed the animals. And so we have worked it in to help get them helped get them by a couple months, but we asked them if they could give us a discount code to stay in one of their cabooses or their cabins. It's right near Maggie Valley. It's a beautiful place to be this time of year, especially the winter months. There's access to ski resorts. I mean, this is a fantastic place to stay. You get to stay and see bison. And they gave us a discount code for our subscribers. It's Yanasa, and that's at Buffalo Creek Vacations. I encourage you guys, if you're looking for something to do, looking to take a vacation, go and check these types of places out, because what has happened because of Helene is having an adverse impact on everybody out there, and trying to keep these farm and agritourism businesses open is our objective. So I'll put a link down below, and I'll put the access code down below. But please, book a vacation, go out there, see it. It's still a beautiful countryside. And on that note, we've also been working with a farm store, and this is one of those things too where the same thing happened. Everything got ruined. They had to get rid of all of their inventory, but they buy from like 25, 30 local farms and sell. They have a storefront that sells it. I mean, that's a very important part of the system for agriculture, and it's failing right now. So that's another one that we've been trying to work and figure out. Okay, we can get the stock replaced. We could try and get some of these issues fixed, but if we don't get people back out into these areas, I mean, it's all for nothing. Like they've got to have the business. Okay, so real quick, I want to explain lame duck, because people get offended when I say lame duck president. What that means is that the president that is on his way out has he has no reason really to do anything politically speaking, because he's done. His political career is over. He's not going to rerun anytime soon. He doesn't have to please his constituents. He can do whatever he wants. And that's why I think in many ways it's a very dangerous position. You see a ton of people who probably shouldn't be let out of jail pardoned. That happens all the time. You've all heard of Clinton Gate, when they pardoned a bunch of people during his lame duck presidency. Joe Biden has pardoned his own son. The other issue that you can run into is you have things like wars breaking out because there's nobody really to hold accountable, politically speaking. There's nobody. So we call it a lame duck president because most of the time we want that lame duck president to just kind of sit on their hands and wait till Inauguration Day before any big decisions are being made. But that's not necessarily how things have been going. But the changes that I was looking at today, because he is moving forward, according to Reuters, on December 16th, the U.S. Department of Energy has zeroed in on 3 regions of the country. It has determined are in major need of new electric transmission infrastructure. These areas are considered national interest electric transmission corridors. Now, if you've watched this channel, I've talked about these national interest electric transmission corridors in the past and what Biden's plans originally were back in May when they released these corridors. These corridors were beyond fathomable in size, okay? And by that, they would have eaten up about 31 million acres of U.S. land. And a lot of this is farmland where these corridors are going. So that, to me, it was a very big deal. Some of these corridors were 200 to 400 miles wide. As I get into this, number one, just because they aren't a national interest anymore doesn't mean that these corridor projects don't exist. What it means when it's national interest is that the federal government can utilize eminent domain to take land to make these corridors work, and they can use federal funds to fund the project. If it's not a national interest corridor, and some of these corridors have been dropped since the election, as recently as 4 days ago, in fact, the Delta Plains corridor, which was, a lot of people had an issue with that one. It was pretty massive in length, 645 miles in length. It was up to 15 miles wide. Some of the electrician contractors themselves were like, why do we need a 15-mile wide corridor? And then, this corridor fed into another corridor that went up to 200 miles wide in some spots. There are a lot of unknowns as to why you need a 50-mile wide corridor, 100-mile wide corridor, or even a 15. A 15-mile wide corridor is a lot. But they did have these massive corridors all across the country. They had 10 of them initially. And many people think, you know, our power grid needs an upgrade. And I think that a lot of people think that this is going to end with Trump, but that's not necessarily true either. Trump thinks our national power grid needs an upgrade, and it needs an upgrade to the extent that he's going to make it a national emergency to upgrade our power grid. But I'm thinking from reading through this, because, you know, the ones in Missouri have had a lot of pushback. A lot of the states have not wanted to grant these power companies eminent domain. They want them to find ways to run their corridors that where they can negotiate contracts with landowners. They don't want to force people to give up their land. When it becomes of national interest, that's when the federal government comes in and says, we're overriding the state. But they got a lot of pushback. Oklahoma, the Attorney General in Oklahoma pushed back, and that is part of the reason why the Delta Plains corridor fell apart 4 days ago. The point is that they've dramatically, you know, as of the 16th, changed these plans. Instead of doing 10, they're now doing 3. These 3 corridors are much narrower than they originally were. Let me bring you up to speed real quick on the original national corridors, because I think for this to make sense and for you to understand the magnitude of this, you have to go back and watch this. I'll put a skip button down below for those of you who remember it.
The government says, hey, we want your land, it's for the public good, and we can take it. It might surprise you to know that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has plans to build out a green energy infrastructure across as much as 103 million acres across the United States. That's a lot of land. Let me break it down for you. The plan includes 10 corridors. There's the Delta Plains corridor, which is going to be 4 to 18 miles wide, 645 miles long. So simple math, 2,580 square miles to 11,610 square miles. That's a maximum of 7.5 million acres. The Mid-Atlantic, 2 miles wide, 180 miles long. That's about 360 square miles or 230,400 acres. The Mid-Atlantic Canada, which is just 1 mile wide and 42 miles long, is 42 square miles, 26,880 acres. Midwest Plains, which is 5 miles wide, 780 miles long, so 3,900 square miles, 2.5 million acres. The Northwest, which is 0.3 miles wide and 515 miles long. I mean, this is really just a typical power line. It's 154.5 square miles, just under 99,000 acres. Mountain Plains Southwest, 10 to 100 miles wide, 540 miles long. That's about 5,400 to 54,000 square miles, 3.5 to 35 million acres. New York Mid-Atlantic, which is 4 miles wide, 12 miles long, 48 square miles, 30,000, almost 31,000 acres. New York, New England, which is 1 mile wide, 60 miles long, 60 square miles, so a little over 38,000 acres. Northern Plains, 10 to 50 miles wide, 300 miles east to west, 400 miles north to south. That's 7,000 to 35,000 square miles, 4.5 million to 22.4 million acres. The Plains Southwest, 5 to 100 miles wide, 345 miles east to west, 220 miles north to south, anywhere between 2,825 to 56,500 square miles, 1.8 million to 35.9 million acres is what it would take to build that. So the total of this massive vision of the United States government is about anywhere between 23,000, which is, you know, if they just did narrow strips, to some of these big strips that they want, 161,000 or almost 162,000 square miles. That's up to 103.2 million acres of land.
Okay, so the 3 corridors that they're keeping on now, you've got the Lake Erie Canada corridor, and this is a very short corridor compared to the other corridors. It will impact parts of Lake Erie, parts of Pennsylvania, and go up into Canada. You have the Southwestern Grid Connector, which includes Colorado, New Mexico, and parts of Oklahoma. Now, the Southwestern Grid Connector, from what I remember, That one originally connected the Mountain Plains, Delta Plains, and Plains Southwest connector. So as I mentioned, the Delta Plains is now off the table altogether. I'm not sure about the other ones. And like I said, just because it's off the table for national interest does not mean that the developers aren't going to try and move forward with them. They just don't have the right to go in and take your land unless the state gives them the right to take their land. I mean, it becomes a states' rights issue. It becomes a private contract issue. That's fine. That's fine and dandy. But the Southwest Grid Connector, which is much narrower now, it goes from 3 to 15 miles wide. It used to go up as much as 200 miles wide or something absolutely ridiculous. There was no explanation for what was going on before other than a massive land grab. And I think that land grab had more to do with green energy. And as we've discussed on this channel, green energy is not everything that is cut out to be. All energy comes at a cost. The only people who were benefiting off of this green energy stuff were private corporations, private investment. And a lot of it isn't even that viable. Some of it is. I mean, I think that we should have a mix of energy, but I think that part of the reason why these corridors before were so massive in scale was to basically build in this green energy infrastructure, which Trump has already said, look, we're going to nix a lot of this stuff. And so that's part of the reason for this dramatic downsize in these energy corridors. Now, these three that I'm talking about, the comment period doesn't end until February 2025. So my guess is that the transition teams have been talking about this. My guess is that this will move forward under Trump after the comment period, irregardless. But like I said, this is much smaller scale than what we were talking about before. We're just talking about 3 instead of 10. They're much smaller. The third one is a tribal energy access corridor, which will run through North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and 5 tribal reservations. Now this, again, is a much narrower corridor than what we were looking at before. It's much shorter. If you looked at the Northern Plains corridor before, it was pretty massive, and a lot of it had to do with the green energy power grid, not so much just getting power lines to these places. Now, these are high energy transmission power lines that, again, some of these areas within the tribal energy access corridor are still going to be 3 to 15 miles wide. That's, wide. So they're still pretty big energy corridors. And yeah, I do think, that there are some infrastructure issues on the reservations. So, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I know it's a good thing that it's not what they had in there before. But like I said, I don't think that you can expect Trump to do completely away with these big energy corridors. I do think that what we're seeing in this massive downsizing of the corridors and their impact on landowners is in part due to the transition teams talking and communicating with each other. That's my guess. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm guessing. I don't think, if anything, I could see Trump maybe adding back to the energy corridors, but again, you're not going to have these large, massive 200-mile wide corridors because he's got a different game plan. He's not trying to fit a bunch of wind turbines and solar panels on government property. And so, like, on that note, when it comes to Trump, and I say this a lot, and I don't mean anything by it for a lot of people who love him, I think that there's some massive improvements that we can expect. So Brooke Rollins, who he's kind of tapped for the USDA official. She's run a think tank, and she's been largely against Agenda 3030 and the big land grabs. She is against foreign ownership of farmland. So these are things that I don't think that you'll see moving forward under this administration, and I think you'll see a more aggressive stance against foreign ownership of farmland. She also has been highly against a lot of the changes in BLM land use, including the conservation use. I've talked a lot about that on this channel. It all sounds good until you actually dig into it and you realize that it was just some sort of land use grab. And on that note, I think you're going to see less national monuments being declared and less national monuments being turned into heritage sites. Heritage sites are really bad. because what they do is they give the UN control not just over the heritage site, but over like a 100 and something mile wide radius around the heritage site that doesn't becomes critically endangered. If you look at Yellowstone, for example, the UN actually has policy-making rights for all the land surrounding Yellowstone because they consider Yellowstone a heritage site, and then they labeled it critically endangered, which gives them that right to regulatory authority. A foreign party, a foreign power has regulatory authority over our land. And I could go on and on about heritage sites and why they're not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but point is, let's keep the blue caps out of here. And the national monuments that have been being put out there, a lot of times where they put these national monuments, or the Biden administration has put them, the rules are already in place. Like, it's not changing a whole lot. It's offering a few more restrictions, keeping people from accessing it for recreation, for farming. But it also is setting that land up to become a heritage site, in my opinion. That's opinion. So take it or leave it. You can. I would suggest listening to Alex Newman on this topic. Fantastic information, and I agree 110% with everything that he says on this topic. I mean, it is, we don't need any of that here. The other thing with somebody like Rollinson at USDA, you probably wouldn't see charges brought up against people like the mods of South Dakota. That's just absolutely ridiculous. But, I'm optimistic when it comes to the new administration, but I'm also always cautious because the motives are different. I think that Trump respects liberty a lot more than the previous administration, and I think he respects it more than last time he was in office. Those are both pros that I think are going in his favor, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with everything that he does, and I'm not putting this video out there to say, hey, this is a huge triumphant win. I've always said I'm a little too libertarian for either party. I think use of eminent domain for anything is bad, and I do think that there will be situations where he will use eminent domain, and just because it's not on a carbon pipeline, it might be on an oil pipeline. And there's some certain arguments that would say that transporting oil underground is a lot more environmentally safe than transporting it on railroads that can't seem to keep their trains on the track. So there's I think that there are positive and negative trade-offs, and what we have seen has been a completely irresponsible balance of those trade-offs. And my hope, and what I think I'm starting to see, is more of a balanced approach, saying, hey, look, we've got to have some energy corridors here, but we're going to scale it way back down to what is actually necessary, and we're going to remove all this green energy stuff, and we're just going to focus on making sure that our power grid is secure. Now, a lot of the grids that I talked about in this video as well, and this is important, a lot of these are already running, or they will be rebuilt on existing right-of-ways. So they've got federal funding, but my guess is that the amount of eminent domain cases you see being brought forward to make these 3 corridors work is going to be very small to none, because they only have to expand them a little bit in comparison to what they were trying to do before. Lots of good things, in my opinion, going on. I'm hoping that we can continue to see some positive direction on this, and hopefully save some of our farmland from complete destruction by this stuff. The guy in Virginia who's fighting, the Caroline County for his farmland, he's still fighting them, by the way. He hasn't given up. And some more power to him. But Caroline County is basically taking 11 acres of prime property off this farmer, offering him pennies on the dollar for what it's actually worth. And then they're pumping that water all the way across the county into another reservoir to cool a bunch of data centers. That's all private use. I mean, this doesn't benefit the public. I mean, they're going to say it benefits the public from, the economy, jobs, that type of stuff. But what they're really doing is they're making these private corporations richer by stealing land from a farmer and then stealing water and pumping it across the entire county for these data centers. And I have to admit, like, I've used AI a couple times. When you run a business where you don't have a lot of employees, sometimes for like those intern type tasks, it's helpful. But I also, for the reasons of the amount of energy that it takes and the things going on, I don't like it. I think it's heading in a bad direction. Are we still going to have this data center push? I think so, even under Trump. That's something that I don't think is going to go away with the new administration. And not so much for surveillance, not so much for government currency, but even if you wanted to push forward with something like Bitcoin, you've got to have the data to track that stuff. So I don't, maybe there'll be a slowdown, maybe there'll be some sort of cutbacks there, but Trump is a businessman, and that's one of the areas where I think that I will end up disagreeing with him on, is I think you're going to continue to see the growth and development of these data centers, which, as you know from watching this channel, take out a lot of resources from agriculture, from food production. I'm hoping he brings some balance to it. And if anything, if what I think from reading about this national power grid infrastructure, if these are the transition teams talking, hopefully that's a sign that we are seeing a little bit of balance brought back to the situation. Because before it was wacky. It was like a sci-fi movie. It was crazy. Anyway, guys, stay safe, and I will try and get more videos out before the end of the year. Keep us in mind over the holidays. We'll keep you in mind. And like I said, hopefully you hear from me. If not, stay blessed.